They said he owned half the land, yet on that stormy night no door opened for him. His silk robe clung to his skin, his jeweled shoes sank into the mud, and for the first time in his life, the millionaire's proud head bent low. He knocked on the homes of men he had once fed with coins, but they shut their doors. He called on friends who had dined at his table, but they turned away their faces. Sit comfortably as we unlock this wonderful story, and remember to click on the subscription button so you won't miss the wonderful stories we tell. There was once a man whose name traveled faster than the wind, carried in whispers through markets, and shouted in the courts of kings. His name was ADEMOYE, the man who owned half the land. His warehouses stretched so wide that even birds lost their way flying across them. His caravans of camels and horses were so long that when the first animal reached the gates of the city, the last was still a day's journey away. Ships bearing his mark sailed across seas, carrying silks, spices, and treasures from distant lands. Children pointed at his golden chariot when it rolled through the streets. Women whispered blessings to his face and curses behind his back. Men bowed, some with respect, others with envy. For in the city, no purse was as heavy as ADEMOYE's, and no heart was as hard. Yes, ADEMOYE was rich. Richer than chiefs, richer than priests, richer even than the king himself. But his wealth was like the sun that burns the earth without giving water. Hungry mothers came to his gates, clutching thin-armed children. He would wave them away with a jeweled hand. "Do not dirty my steps," he would say. "I worked for my gold. Let them do the same." Beggars knelt before his chariot wheels, crying for crumbs. He tossed them a single coin only when others were watching. And when they thanked him, he laughed. "One coin should be enough to fill your empty stomachs. If it cannot, then you do not deserve to live." Yet despite his cruelty, the people still praised him aloud. For when he walked into the market with his robe of purple silk, when he raised his voice in the council hall, none dared oppose him. To cross ADEMOYE was to starve, for he controlled the food, the ships, the land. But in the secret corners of their hearts, the people whispered a different truth. What use is a man who has the wealth of kings but no kindness in his soul? And though ADEMOYE thought of himself as untouchable, fate was sharpening its knife. The day had begun with celebration. ADEMOYE had hosted a banquet in his honor, a feast so grand that the floors of the king's hall shook beneath the dancers' feet. Golden lamps burned brighter than the stars. Servants carried trays heavy with roasted meat, spiced rice, and wines from across the seas. Musicians played until their fingers bled. At the center of it all sat ADEMOYE, clothed in robes of scarlet silk, a chain of gold heavy around his neck. He raised his jeweled cup and declared, "Let the poor starve if they must. For in this world, wealth is power, and I, ADEMOYE, shall never lack it." The hall erupted with forced laughter, though many trembled inside at his words. But far above the palace roof, the sky was listening. Clouds gathered heavy and dark, covering the moon. A low rumble of thunder answered his boast, like the growl of an unseen lion. When the banquet ended, ADEMOYE climbed into his golden chariot, drawn by 6 strong horses. His servants hurried alongside, holding lanterns to light his path through the narrow streets. But as the procession reached the open road, the heavens broke. Rain came down in torrents, whipping through the air like arrows. The wind howled and tore through the city, slamming shutters, toppling market stalls. Lightning split the sky in jagged streaks, turning night into blinding day. The horses panicked. Their hooves slipped in the mud. The wheels of the chariot sank deep, and with a sharp crack, one wheel shattered. The chariot tilted violently, spilling ADEMOYE into the mud. His silk robe clung to his skin, ruined. His jeweled crown rolled away, swallowed by the rainwater rushing through the gutters. "Fix it! Fix the chariot at once!" he roared, his voice breaking under the storm. But when he turned, he saw no one. His servants, terrified of the storm, had fled into the darkness, each man seeking shelter for himself. For the first time in his life, ADEMOYE was alone. He stumbled through the rain, shivering. The streets that once bent before him now seemed endless and empty. He banged on the nearest door with his fist. "Open! Do you not know who I am? It is I, ADEMOYE, the great merchant." A window cracked open above. A man's voice shouted down, "Then go to your palace, rich man. We are poor here, and we have nothing to spare for you." The window slammed shut. Shocked, Adewale staggered to another house, one belonging to a friend who had dined at his table many times, drinking his wine and praising his name. He pounded at the door. "My friend, it is I, Adewale. Open, let me in." The door opened just a crack. A familiar face peeked out, but when the man saw him drenched and shivering, recognition turned to fear. He shook his head. "You bring misfortune with this storm. Go away." The door closed. The bolt fell into place. One by one, Adewale tried the homes of men who once bowed before him, men who had eaten his food and kissed his ring. But no door opened, no voice welcomed him in. The rain grew colder. His teeth chattered. His pride, once his armor, now felt heavier than the rain-soaked robe dragging at his body. And so the richest man in the land, whose name once shook the marketplace, stumbled alone into the night, driven by hunger, cold, and the laughter of the storm. Fate was leading him to the old stone bridge where the forgotten of the city slept. The storm raged on as Adewale stumbled through the deserted streets, each step heavier than the last. His robe, once bright and gleaming, now clung to him like a curse. His jeweled sandals had sunk so deep into the mud that he tore them off and walked barefoot, his feet cut by stones hidden beneath the water, rushing along the gutters. The night grew darker. The lanterns in the city were out, their flames drowned by the rain. For the first time in his life, Adewale feared the silence of the streets, the silence of indifference. And then in the distance, he saw a faint flicker of orange light, trembling beneath the old stone bridge at the edge of the city. He followed it, drawn as much by hope as by desperation. When he drew closer, he heard voices, low, tired voices. Under the bridge, a small group of men and women huddled together, their backs bent, their bodies wrapped in rags. They crouched around a pitiful fire made of broken wood and scraps. The flames spat weakly against the rain, casting shadows across hollow cheeks and sunken eyes. Adewale stopped, his breath sharp in his chest. Never had he stood so close to the poor. Always he had seen them from the safety of his chariot, from the height of his palace balcony. From there they looked small, almost less than human. But here, up close, they were flesh and blood, their suffering painted in every line of their faces. He swallowed hard and stepped under the bridge. The beggars stirred. Some shrank back, suspicious of the stranger in soaked silk. One man coughed and muttered, "What does a peacock like you want in the nest of crows?" Adewale's pride flared. His lips opened to shout at them, to command them as he always had. But the storm outside reminded him of his weakness. He forced his voice steady. "Move aside," he muttered. "I need a place to sit." For a moment, silence. Then a harsh laugh echoed from the shadows. "You demand space, rich man, as if this bridge belongs to you too." Adewale stiffened. Never in his life had anyone spoken to him that way. He opened his mouth to answer, but before he could, a frail voice cut through the noise. "Leave him," said an old woman. Her voice cracked, but calm. She sat hunched by the fire, her gray hair clinging wetly to her face. "The rain does not ask a man how much gold he has before it soaks him." The others muttered, but they shifted, making room on the muddy ground. Adewale lowered himself stiffly, the cold earth biting into his bones. He tried not to shiver, but the rain had seeped deep into his skin. The fire crackled weakly. He stared at the thin sticks that gave so little warmth, and realized he had never known true cold before. In his mansion, fires roared in every room. Servants rushed to drape him in dry robes before the chill even touched him. But here, one fragile flame had to warm them all. A young boy sitting nearby tore a scrap of bread in half. His hands shook as he held it out. "Take," the boy whispered. Adewale blinked. The bread was small, barely enough for the boy himself. Hunger gnawed at Adewale's belly, but pride tightened his throat. He wanted to refuse. He wanted to say, "I am Adewale, the man who owns half the land. I do not eat scraps from beggars." But his stomach growled, loud in the silence, and the boy's eyes held no mockery, only kindness. Slowly, Adewale reached out and took the bread. It was hard, stale, tasteless, yet in that moment, it was the sweetest thing he had ever eaten. As he chewed, the old woman spoke again. Strange night, is it not? The storm has made kings and beggars equal. Look, our roofs leak, and so does yours. Our clothes are wet, and so are yours. Hunger gnaws us, and now it gnaws you too. The beggars chuckled softly, not cruelly, but with the weary wisdom of those who had long known suffering. ADEMOYE bowed his head. For the first time, he had no answer. He lay back on the cold ground, the rags of the beggars pressed close against him for warmth. The firelight flickered across their faces, faces of men, women, children who had nothing, yet still found enough to share. As the storm roared outside, ADEMOYE, the man who owned half the land, closed his eyes under a bridge that belonged to no one, and sleep came to him with the taste of humility. That night, sleep came slowly to ADEMOYE. His body ached from the hard earth, and the stench of damp rags and unwashed skin filled his nostrils. He tossed and turned, shivering. The fire at the center of the beggars flickered low, glowing red like the last breath of a dying heart. At last, exhaustion conquered him. His eyes closed, and the world dissolved into darkness. In the dream, ADEMOYE found himself once more in his palace. The lamps burned brightly, the tables overflowed with food, and the laughter of merchants filled the air. He stood tall in his silk robes, his chest heavy with jewels. His voice boomed as he commanded servants, who scurried like ants to please him. But then, slowly, the palace began to change. The golden walls melted into dust that slipped through his fingers. The tables collapsed, their food rotting into black ash. One by one, the servants vanished into smoke. The laughter turned to cries, distant, aching cries that echoed through the empty hall. ADEMOYE turned, searching for the source of the sound, and there they were, the poor, the widows, the orphans, the beggars he had driven from his gates. They stood in rows before him, their hollow eyes glowing in the shadows. He tried to speak, to command them as he always had, but his voice was gone, stolen from his throat. He opened his mouth, and only silence poured out. The beggars stepped closer. Their ragged feet made no sound. They grew taller and taller until they loomed over him like giants, while he shrank smaller, weaker, trembling at their feet. Then, from among them, the old woman he had met under the bridge stepped forward. Her bent back straightened, her frail body glowed with a strange light, and her voice thundered like the storm outside. ADEMOYE, you built barns too small to hold your pride, yet too large to hold your kindness. You filled your stomach, but never fed another. You clothe yourself in silk, but let others freeze. Do you not know that wealth is tested not in abundance, but in what you give? Her words struck him like fire. He fell to his knees, clutching the dust that had once been his gold. Mercy, he tried to cry, but again no sound escaped his lips. The beggars encircled him, their eyes burning brighter, their hands reaching toward him. The hall grew darker. The walls of his palace crumbled into sand. And from above, a voice deeper than the earth itself echoed through the dream. You are a prisoner of your wealth. Tonight you sleep with beggars. Tomorrow you must decide whether to rise with them or fall with your pride. ADEMOYE screamed, though no one could hear it, and then he woke. The fire under the bridge had gone out, leaving only the faint glow of embers. The beggars slept around him, their thin arms curled beneath their heads, their breath soft in the silence. His own body was stiff, his clothes heavy with damp. But it was not the cold that made him tremble. It was the memory of the dream, the echo of the voice that still rang in his ears. For the first time in his life, ADEMOYE felt fear. Not the fear of storms, nor of hunger, but the fear of judgment, judgment that gold could not silence. He lay awake until dawn, staring into the ashes, his mind turning over the vision again and again. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, pale and uncertain after the storm. The city lay quiet, its streets washed clean by the night's rage. Puddles shimmered like broken mirrors, and the scent of wet earth rose into the air. Under the bridge, the beggars stirred. One by one they rose, rubbing sleep from weary eyes, coughing the dampness from their lungs. Some went to the river to drink. Others gathered scraps of wood to feed the dying embers of the fire. ADEMOYE sat apart from them, his knees drawn to his chest, his robe still heavy with rain. His body ached, but it was nothing compared to the ache inside him, the memory of the dream that had burned through his sleep. The echo of the voice still thundered in his chest. Wealth is tested not in abundance, but in what you give. He lifted his eyes to the beggars around him. They moved with a kind of weary grace, sharing what little they had. One tore his last piece of bread and passed it to another. A mother pressed a handful of roasted maize into her child's hand before taking a smaller portion for herself. Adewale's lips trembled. In all his years of feasts and overflowing tables, he had never seen such generosity. He had been surrounded by gold, yet he had never given with this kind of heart. The old woman from the night before shuffled toward him, carrying a small clay pot of water. She held it out with both hands, her eyes kind though her body was frail. "Drink, son," she said softly. Adewale stared at the pot. The water was cloudy, drawn from the river. In his palace, he would have spat at such a thing. He would have summoned servants to fetch him wine from distant lands, water from the purest wells. But now his throat burned with thirst, and his pride had no strength left to resist. He took the pot in both hands and drank deeply. The water was warm, earthy, with a taste of mud, yet it washed his throat like a blessing. "Why do you give me this?" Adewale asked, his voice rough, almost childlike. "I have never given you anything. In truth, I have despised you." The old woman smiled, her wrinkled face soft with wisdom. "Because hunger does not ask for riches before it bites. Thirst does not ask for titles before it dries your tongue. We give because we know what it is to lack. And kindness, my son, is the only coin we carry." Her words struck him like a spear through the heart. Adewale lowered his head, unable to meet her gaze. For years he had thought himself strong because of his wealth. Yet here sat a woman who owned nothing but rags and a clay pot, and still she was richer than him in the one thing he had never possessed: compassion. As the beggars prepared to leave the shelter of the bridge, each going their way to beg for scraps in the markets, Adewale remained seated, lost in thought. His mind replayed the dream, the voice, the kindness of strangers who had every reason to turn him away but instead welcomed him. Slowly, painfully, the truth settled in his heart. His wealth had not made him great. It had made him empty. He rose at last, his feet still bare, his robe stained with mud. The city was waking, the calls of traders already beginning to rise. He looked once more at the beggars, at their thin faces, their quiet dignity. "Thank you," he said, his voice breaking. Some of them looked surprised. Some even laughed softly, but the old woman only nodded, her eyes shining with something deeper than pity: hope. And so Adewale began the long walk back to his mansion. The streets that once bowed before him now felt different. The stones beneath his feet seemed heavier, as if carrying the weight of his pride. Every face he passed reminded him of the dream, of the judgment, of the truth he could no longer escape. For the first time in his life, Adewale was not thinking of gain, or gold, or glory. He was thinking of the poor. He was thinking of the bridge. And deep within him, a seed had been planted. The seed of change. The streets of the city were alive again when Adewale returned from the bridge. Merchants opened their stalls, children ran barefoot through the puddles left by the storm, and women carried baskets of fruit balanced gracefully on their heads. To them, it was just another day. But to Adewale, the city looked like a new world. He walked slowly, barefoot, his once royal robe clinging to him in tatters. People turned their heads, whispering. Some laughed. Others shook their heads in disbelief. They had never seen the mighty Adewale so reduced. At last he reached the great gates of his mansion. The guards rushed forward, their eyes wide. "My lord, what happened to you? Where are your servants? Your chariot?" But Adewale brushed past them in silence. He walked through the vast halls, past golden pillars and carved doors, past fountains and statues, each one a monument to his pride. The marble floors gleamed beneath his muddy feet, and yet, for the first time, none of it filled him with joy. He stopped before a tall mirror in the grand hall. The man who stared back at him was unrecognizable. His hair was plastered to his head, his eyes red from exhaustion, his fine robe stained with filth. He who once glittered brighter than jewels now looked like the very beggars he had despised. He sank to his knees before the mirror. "What have I become?" he whispered. I built barns too large to hold my pride, but too small to hold my kindness. The dream, the old woman's words, the boy's gift of bread, all of it rushed back to him. He realized then that his riches had been nothing but chains, binding him to emptiness. And in that moment, Adewale wept. From that day forward, the city saw a change no one had thought possible. Adewale opened his warehouses, releasing sacks of grain to feed the hungry. His servants carried baskets of food into the markets and laid them before the poor. He gave blankets, sandals, and water to those who had none. At first, the people watched in disbelief. Was this a trick? A display meant to buy more praise? But when the days turned into weeks and Adewale himself was seen among the poor, walking the streets, speaking gently, eating beside them, their doubts faded. He built homes for widows and orphans, schools for children who had never held a book. He sold half his land to pay for doctors to tend to the sick. And every evening, he returned to the old stone bridge with baskets of food, sitting with the beggars as though they were his kin. Some still mocked him. Why waste your fortune on the poor? They will only beg again tomorrow. But Adewale only smiled and replied, if I feed them today, they will live to see tomorrow. That is enough. The beggars who once pitied him now blessed him. The boy who had shared his bread sat on his lap, eating fruit from his hand. The old woman, still frail but smiling, said to him one evening, you were rich before, O Adewale, but now you are wealthy. And so it was said in that city, the night Adewale slept under the bridge, he lost his pride but found his soul. Moral of the story, true wealth is not measured by the gold you gather, but by the lives you lift. A man who keeps his riches dies empty, but a man who gives becomes eternal in the hearts of others.